Hello everyone, welcome back. And if you are here, if this title reached something deep and specific in you, then something has happened. Or is happening. The fog is lifting. The pieces are connecting. The story you were told about yourself, about them, about what was real, is colliding with the story you are finally allowing yourself to see. And everything is changing. There is a moment, survivors describe it with remarkable consistency across thousands of separate accounts, when the last piece locks into place. When the final lie is seen for what it is. When the accumulated weight of small distortions and large manipulations and years of carefully managed reality suddenly resolves into a single, clear, devastating image. The truth. Complete. Unignorable. Permanent. That moment is not dramatic in the way films depict revelation. It is quiet. It arrives in the middle of an ordinary day, or in the 3 o'clock stillness of a sleepless night, or in the middle of a sentence they are speaking when something behind their eyes shifts and you see, suddenly, completely, without any possibility of unseeing, exactly what has been happening. Exactly who you have been with. Exactly what you were to them. The empath who reaches this moment has crossed a threshold that cannot be uncrossed. The clarity that arrives when every lie is finally seen is not like ordinary clarity, it is total. It reorganizes everything. Every memory. Every excuse you made for them. Every moment of self-doubt they engineered. Every time you questioned your own perception instead of theirs. All of it resolves, at once, into the truth you were always trying to reach through a fog they deliberately maintained. And here is the question that drives everything that follows. The haunting, essential, psychologically loaded question at the center of this video. What happens to the narcissist when the empath reaches this moment? What happens to the system, the dynamic, the carefully constructed reality, when the person it was built to manage and deceive finally sees through every single layer of it? The answer is not what most people expect. It is not a dramatic confrontation. It is not a moment of remorse. It is not the narcissist finally being held accountable in the visible, satisfying way that justice sometimes arrives in stories. What happens is more psychological, more precise, more revealing of the narcissist's true interior than any confrontation could ever produce. We are going to walk through it completely. From the moment the empath's seeing registers in the narcissist system, to the behavioral cascade that follows, to the long-term consequences of having been finally, irrevocably seen through by the one person whose perception they most depended on managing. Every stage. Every layer. Every truth. The narcissist built an empire on the empath's partial sight. On the empath seeing enough to stay but not enough to leave. On the empath's extraordinary sensitivity being directed toward understanding the narcissist rather than seeing through them. That empire had one foundational vulnerability. The empath's capacity, once activated in the right direction, to see everything. That capacity has now been activated. The seeing is complete. And the empire is experiencing something it was never designed to survive. Stay with every word of what follows. Because this is not just the story of what happens to the narcissist. It is the story of what happens to you, when you finally, fully, without reservation, trust what you see. The moment has arrived. Let's name what it does. Before we trace what happens to the narcissist, we must understand what the empath's full sight actually represents, in psychological terms, in operational terms, in terms of what it removes from the narcissist's available resources. Because the empath seeing through every lie is not just a personal awakening. It is a structural event in the narcissist's world. The narcissist's reality depended on the empath's managed perception. Not just for supply, though the supply implications are profound. For something more fundamental, the external validation of their constructed self. The empath, in believing the performance, or enough of it, for long enough, was providing the narcissist with the most potent form of supply available, the validation of someone with genuine depth and genuine sensitivity. When a person of genuine feeling believes in you, truly, deeply believes in the version of yourself you are performing, it provides a quality of validation that shallow supply cannot replicate. The narcissist knew, at some level beneath conscious articulation, that the empath's belief was different. More real. More sustaining. The belief of someone with actual interior life has a weight that the belief of someone without it simply does not carry. This is why the narcissist invested so specifically in managing the empath's perception. Not just to maintain control, to maintain the quality of validation that the empath's genuine depth provided. The empath seeing through every lie does not just remove supply. It removes the specific, irreplaceable supply of being believed by someone worth being believed by. And that removal is catastrophic in ways the narcissist cannot fully process. The first thing that happens in the narcissist system when the empath's full seeing registers, the validation architecture collapses. Constructed for the empath's consumption, loses its audience in the most complete possible way. Not because the empath left the room. Because the empath is still in the room and is no longer watching the performance. They are watching the performer. Watching the performer, seeing the mechanism behind the presentation, the calculation beneath the charm, the wound that drives the control, is experienced by the narcissist as exposure. Not the exposure of accusation or confrontation. The exposure of being truly, completely seen. And being truly seen is the narcissist's oldest, deepest, most foundational terror. The one their entire psychology was constructed to prevent. The narcissist system registers the empath's clear seeing as a threat before the conscious mind has time to construct a response strategy. Something physiological happens, a specific quality of alarm that has no clean outlet because the threat is not external and cannot be fought or fled. The threat is perceptual. The empath simply knows. And knowing cannot be unknowed, cannot be argued with, cannot be managed back into confusion. The first behavioral response is intensification of the existing deceptions. A doubling down on the very lies the empath can now see through, because the narcissist system does not yet have an alternative response protocol. The lies that worked for years are deployed again, at higher intensity, with greater conviction. And the empath watches the familiar performance with new eyes. Clear eyes. Eyes that see every seam in the construction. The intensified deceptions fail completely. And the failure is experienced by the narcissist in real time, in the empath's lack of response, in the absence of the confusion and doubt and reaching that the deceptions previously produced. The empath's steadiness in the face of the performance is the most destabilizing possible feedback. It says, I see what you are doing. I know what this is. It is not working. And it will not work again. The narcissist enters what clinicians describe as narcissistic injury in its acutest form, not the ordinary injury of criticism or defeat, but the specific, catastrophic injury of having the false self seen through by the primary audience. The audience whose beliefs sustained the performance. The audience without whose perception the performance loses its most essential validation. The injury is total. And the response to total injury is the most revealing thing the narcissist will ever show. Here is where the dynamic inverts completely. Here is where years of power flowing in one direction reverse. The empath has seen through every lie. And now the narcissist must navigate a world in which their most important mirror has become a window, transparent in both directions. The first major behavioral pivot, the narcissist attempts to make the empath doubt their own seeing. This is the oldest move in the arsenal, the move that has worked countless times before, that has successfully returned the empath to confusion when clarity was arriving. The gaslighting intensifies to a level the empath has never previously encountered. But something is different now. The seeing is complete. And complete seeing is not vulnerable to gaslighting in the way partial seeing is. When you have seen every single lie, when the pattern is fully mapped, fully understood, fully integrated into your perception of the relationship, individual attempts to make you doubt specific perceptions cannot undermine the whole. The architecture of clarity holds even when individual stones are pushed. The empath does not fight the gaslighting. Does not argue with each specific denial. Does not perform the confusion the narcissist is trying to produce. They watch it. Calmly. With the specific, sorrowful clarity of someone who recognizes a move they have seen performed hundreds of times, and who finally, completely, understands what it is for. And the watching, the calm, clear, unarguing watching, is more destabilizing than any counterargument could be. The narcissist escalates to the next strategy, emotional flooding. Extreme displays of vulnerability, of remorse, of the transformation that the empath always hoped for. Tears that arrive with perfect timing. Confessions calibrated to be just revealing enough to seem real without actually exposing anything that cannot be retracted. The performance of breakthrough. The offer of the thing the empath spent years waiting to receive. The empath who has seen through every lie sees through this too. Not with cruelty, with the specific heartbreak of someone who wanted this to be real for so long that they know, in every detail, exactly what real would look like. And this is not it. The timing is too perfect. The vulnerability too performed. The remorse too targeted at producing a specific response rather than genuinely emerging from a specific feeling. The narcissist watches the emotional flooding fail. Watches the empath receive the most sophisticated performance of vulnerability in their arsenal, and remain standing. Remain clear. Remain, heartbreakingly to the narcissist, themselves. Not moved in the direction the performance was designed to move them. Not softened in the way that softening had always been achievable before. The empath has become, somehow, simultaneously more feeling and more grounded than they have ever been. The combination is impenetrable. The power has shifted. This is the moment that will be felt for years, by both parties, in entirely different ways. The empath feels it as a specific kind of terrifying freedom, the freedom of someone who no longer needs the narcissist to confirm what they know. The narcissist feels it as the ground moving, the stable platform of the empath's managed perception sliding away beneath everything they built on top of it. Desperation enters the narcissist's behavior in ways that have no precedent in the relationship. Moves that sacrifice subtlety for urgency. Approaches that reveal more of the underlying panic than the performance can contain. The mask, which was always a deliberate, maintained construction, begins showing the effort of its own maintenance in ways that the empath, with clear eyes, can now see completely. The construction is visible. And visible construction is not a mask. It is a face trying to hide behind its own hands. The plot twist that neither party anticipated, the empath seeing does not produce the explosion the narcissist's defenses were constructed to withstand. It produces something the defenses have no protocol for, a quiet, clear, compassionate, fully informed withdrawal of belief. The empath does not accuse. Does not expose. Does not perform their knowing for an audience. They simply stop believing. Completely. And the narcissist, whose entire constructed world required the empath's belief to remain coherent, watches that world begin, quietly and irrevocably, to dissolve. The collapse moves through layers. The outermost layer, the social performance, the curated image, the carefully managed public self, holds longest. The narcissist is a skilled enough performer that the exterior can be maintained even while interior structures are failing. But the maintenance costs more now. Requires more energy. Because the energy that used to be available from the empath's believing, that sustaining, validating, high-quality supply, is no longer flowing. The supply drought creates visible stress in secondary relationships. The narcissist, depleted by the loss of the empath's quality supply, demands more from available alternatives. The demands exceed what those relationships were structured to provide. The alternatives begin sensing the urgency beneath the charm. The specific desperation of someone who needs more than they are receiving and cannot understand why the deficit persists. The deficit persists because the empath supply was never just attention or admiration. It was the supply of genuine depth believing in them. Of real sensitivity oriented toward understanding them. Of actual human warmth directed at the performance of a person rather than a person. The narcissist cannot explain this specificity even to themselves. Can only feel the absence of something that replacements consistently fail to provide. The obsession with understanding what changed in the empath begins. This is a specific, documented consequence of being fully seen through by a primary supply source. The narcissist becomes consumed with reverse engineering the empath's clarity. When did it happen? What did they see? Which specific lie was the last one? The obsession is not about the empath as a person. It is about identifying the vulnerability in the system that allowed full penetration of the constructed reality. The obsession is unanswerable because the answer is not a single moment, it is an accumulation. The empath's sight built over time, layer by layer, as each lie added to a pattern that eventually became undeniable. There is no single point of failure to identify and defend against. The entire system failed. And systems that fail completely cannot be patched, they must be rebuilt from foundations the narcissist does not have access to. The smear campaign often arrives here, the narcissist's external offensive against the empath who has seen through them. But the smear campaign carries a specific structural weakness when launched against an empath who has achieved full clarity. The empath does not need to defend against it. Because the empath who truly sees through every lie has also seen through the mechanism of the smear, understands what it is for, why it is being deployed, what fear it is covering. And that understanding makes them immune to its most damaging effects. Mutual contacts who receive the narcissist's revised narrative encounter, on the empath side, something unexpected. A person who is not performing innocence, not defensively counter-narrating, not emotionally activated by the campaign. A person who simply continues being themselves, clearly, consistently, authentically. And authentic consistency, in the presence of a smear campaign, is the most effective possible rebuttal. It requires no words. It speaks in behavior over time. And time, for the empath's truth, is always an ally. The internal consequences deepen as the weeks and months pass. The narcissist, who built their self-perception partly on the belief that they had successfully managed and contained the empath's perception for the duration of the relationship, must now integrate a deeply threatening realization: the management was less complete than they believed. The empath saw more than was known. And everything they saw was accurate. This realization produces what might be described as a retroactive narcissistic injury, the wound of knowing that, during years of the relationship, the empath was perceiving truths that the narcissist believed were successfully concealed. Every interaction is retroactively re-examined through this lens. Every moment when the empath was quiet, or sad, or trying to understand, was that the clarity arriving? Were they always seeing? The uncertainty is permanent and unresolvable. And unresolvable uncertainty is a specific kind of torment for a psychology that requires control of all variables. What remains, after all the strategies have failed and all the consequences have landed through the empath's eyes, cannot unfeel the specific quality of being known completely by someone of genuine depth. Cannot reconstruct the reality they managed so carefully once it has been seen through by the one person whose perception made it real. The empath's full sight is the one event in the narcissist's life that does not resolve. It simply, permanently, irrevocably, remains. The most honest mirror they were ever held up to. And the only one they could not control. And here we arrive. At the truth this entire video was always carrying beneath the psychology and the behavioral mapping and the documented consequences. The truth about the empath who finally sees through every single lie. What that seeing cost. What it produced. And what it means for the life that exists on the other side of it. Seeing through every lie is not a victory that feels like victory. Not immediately. The clarity that arrives when the last illusion falls is not accompanied by triumph. It is accompanied by grief. The grief of lost time. The grief of investment that cannot be recovered. The grief of the relationship you wanted, the one that was always being performed but never actually existed, finally confirmed as the fiction it always was. Let the grief be real. It deserves to be real. You did not love a fiction, you loved what you believed was a person, and you loved them with everything your extraordinary depth of feeling had available. That love was real even if its object was performing rather than receiving it. The love was yours. It came from you. And it was real. Grieve it the way real things deserve to be grieved. And then, in the space that grief eventually creates when it is honored rather than suppressed, recognize what the seeing has given you. Not just freedom from the relationship. Freedom from the managed reality. Freedom to trust your own perception again. To listen to the voice that was always telling you the truth and was always being overridden by the narcissist's strategic confusion. That voice is yours. It always was. And it is now speaking clearly into a space that can finally hear it. The sensitivity that made you accessible to the narcissist, the depth of feeling, the orientation toward understanding, the extraordinary capacity for empathy that they catalogued and exploited and built